Okay, I'm here with Jim Harkness, President of the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy. Jim, can you tell me where agriculture fits into the scheme of things, the context of these climate change talks?
Well, agriculture actually should be at the center of the climate change talks. In 1993, in the original convention, the parties agreed unanimously that the reason it was so urgent to address climate change was because of three things. First of all, to allow natural ecosystems to have time to adapt. Second of all, and to protect them. Second of all, to secure uninterrupted food production globally. And third of all, so that we could have sustained economic development. And obviously agriculture is central to food production, but it's also important for the other two. Land use change associated with agriculture, and agriculture itself is the most important threat to natural ecosystems on the planet, and indirectly the emissions that are associated with land use change and agriculture contribute about a third of the greenhouse gas emissions that are driving climate change. And in terms of economic development, agriculture is in fact the single biggest employer on the planet. Over 2 billion people earn their livelihoods from farming and fishing and herding. So, no matter which of the three main reasons why we need to address climate change you're concerned about, agriculture is right at the center.
I mean, how was it that it wasn't right at the center in the debate, a few years ago, and is it shifting back towards the center now?
Well, I think that because of the very important role that a historical and present role of industrialized or Annex I countries in driving emissions historically, the concern for mitigation and real commitments by those countries, I think for very good reasons, was of paramount importance in the Kyoto Protocol. So I think that was actually appropriate. Agriculture now it's coming into the talks, but unfortunately the concern for adaptation to some extent has been glossed over, and people are jumping ahead to say, well, how can agriculture in the south help mitigate emissions in the north? And we think that's a big mistake.
Is that the message you're bringing here to Cancun? Yes,
I would say, first of all, adaptation as the top priority is our main message, and so that in Tianjin and in the discussions between Copenhagen and now, there seemed to be a growing sense that there should be a fund and that adaptation should be very key. Adaptation really needs to focus on smallholder farmers. Over 85% of the farms on the planet are less than 2 hectares in size, and they grow over 70% of the food in the world. So a strong central adaptation fund that focuses on small farms in the global south is absolutely central to success in Cancun and moving forward. And at the same time, I think we need to make sure that fund is controlled by the UNFCCC or a UN body rather than by existing institutions like the World Bank, because many of its lending practices and policies have in fact been driving climate change and have been driving small farms out of business for the last quarter century.
I mean, how are the World Bank and the IMF likely to respond to that suggestion then?
Well, we don't really care. We feel like this is a decision that should be made by the global community and not by the World Bank. So we're working with parties and with farmers' organizations from around the world to make sure that single voice is heard by the parties and that we can get a decision.
I mean, does most of your work relate to agriculture in the developing countries, or is it equally, presumably, a very different argument, a very different scenario in the industrialized countries?
Well, we are the Institute for Ag and Trade Policy, and that should tell you a little bit that we are actually concerned with agriculture globally, and I've been talking about the importance of adaptation for small farmers in the South, but of course one of the important drivers of climate change is the industrial model of farming that has been driven from the global North. So we work very much on those policies as well to ensure that some of the sort of failed, very input-heavy, fossil fuel-intensive models of agriculture that are now being pushed aren't seen as a solution to climate change, but are actually recognized as the driver that they are.
At the end of this 2-week conference, what's the very least you would like to see them achieve by next Friday?
Well, frankly, given what we've heard from Japan and the degree to which public participation, the voices of developing countries are being marginalized through the sort of green room informal backroom politics, the whole chair's text process of taking the majority of the countries out of the conversation, I think we would hope at the very least that the Kyoto Protocol is preserved, that there is agreement on adaptation and on some sort of a central fund that could be managed through the UN FCCC.
And that certainly does seem to be the message coming out, that the smaller nations, the less powerful nations, their voices are being marginalised. I just wonder what kind of reaction, what kind of alternative paths that the smaller nations could take.
Well, I think the important thing to keep in mind is that what's significant in Cancun is not just what's happening in the Moon Palace, right? And that around the world, communities and farmers and cities and even nations aren't waiting for an agreement at the central level. There's already a tremendous amount of action happening on the ground, and so I'm really heartened to see the degree to which people around the world are recognizing that small-scale, ecologically based agriculture, rooted in the knowledge of farmers and based on policies that build toward resilient food systems, those things are already being recognized as keys to addressing climate change. People aren't waiting. People are moving ahead, and I hope that our so-called leaders will follow.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.